Hello everybody and welcome to this workshop on AI sandboxes. Thank you so much for choosing to spend what must be your morning with us. My name is Sophie Tomlinson and I'm the Director of Programs at the DAY3 Initiative. For people who aren't familiar with our work, we are a think, do, tank working on data governance and sandboxes, working with businesses, governments and civil society on how we can responsibly unlock the value of data for all. We're here today to talk about how sandboxes and different types of experimental regulatory approaches can help us in using AI, in assessing whether we want to or need to use AI, and also approaching this governance questions that we face as we see AI penetrating different types of sectors. So what I'd like to just share with you before we get started is a QR code to a Mentimeter that we will be running. Please check out the QR code and go to the first question we have for you because we'd love to get your insights. We have a very diverse and an exciting panel today with many different speakers, and as you can see from this list, we have a couple of people online but also in person with us here in Oslo at the IGF. I'm going to introduce them as we go through the session, but as you can see, all their names here. So first of all, what I'd like to start with is what is a sandbox and what do we know about this as a concept and a tool for tech development and policy innovation? And I'd like to hand over to Mariana Rozo Paz, who is the Research and Project Management Lead at the DAY3 Initiative, to give us a first look at what sandboxes are and their potential for AI. So Mari, over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. And hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are very excited about hosting this workshop. I think it's like the third workshop that we host at the IGF focused on sandboxes. And for those that are here in person, I'd actually like to see a little show of hands of who here played in a sandbox as a kid, or maybe with Legos, with building blocks. Building things. I see laughs and hands going up, even from the technical team, which is exciting. Well, I did too, and I was actually quite obsessed with playing with Legos and building things. And one of the things that we realized when it comes to governing data responsibly and emerging technologies responsibly is that we often forget how we used to play when we were kids. And as we were children growing up, we were actually quite excited about experimenting and about thinking about building things, building them, and then kind of destroying them and building something new again. And that flexible, agile mindset that maybe we had when we were children is what we're often lacking when it comes to building agile regulations and shaping how we're governing technologies, building technologies, and addressing the complex challenges that we're facing nowadays. So sandboxes, I would actually like for us to go to the Menti. Could we look into the answers of that first question that we had? Thank you. So I'm seeing that people are answering collaboration, solution. That's what comes to mind when you hear sandboxes, which is an exciting response, I must say. And that's actually what sandboxes are all about. It's about flexibility. It's about collaborating. So sandboxes are collaborative spaces, safe spaces for collaboration in which, by nature, different stakeholders come together to craft solutions, experiment with technologies. There are different types of sandboxes, as we will be more than happy to share more of later, but regulatory sandboxes are those in which the different stakeholders, the public, the private sector, and hopefully also civil society, experiment and test technologies against an existing or an in-development regulatory framework. And operational sandboxes are those in which different stakeholders test with the data or with existing technologies. Sandboxes can also be hybrid, and we can go more into that. They were originally created within the finance sector to test financial technologies, and they are now being used across sectors for AI, for health, for transportation, and in many other use cases. And they're a promising methodology in the end that has already been implemented, again, across sectors, and is being pretty effective in driving innovation and ensuring that we are doing things as we were when we were growing up. So I'm seeing very interesting responses, testing, collaboration, solution. And if we go back to the slides that we had, I also wanted to share at the DAY3 initiative, we have been doing intense and extensive work around sandboxes. And we're sharing here, thank you. We're sharing here our Sandboxes for AI report, which is our latest report focused on the potential of sandboxes for AI. We have a mapping that has identified over 66 sandboxes that now is around 150 focused on different topics and particularly on AI innovation. And here you can also see a map of the distribution of sandboxes across the world, which is a very exciting and interesting methodology that's being implemented not only in developed countries, but also in developing economies and in countries throughout the global south, in Latin America, in different countries in Asia, and in Africa. So we're seeing that this is a tool that's proven interesting, successful, and powerful when it comes to testing bold ideas in collaborative and safe spaces. And at the DataSphere initiative, we also have a methodology on how to do a sandbox that includes not only thinking about how to do them responsibly, but about responsible design, effective communication and engagement, and making sure that it is not only a space where specific startups or private companies have access to resources and testing and iteration, but it's also a space that in the end creates public value and translates into better technologies for our society in general. So that's a bit of a snapshot of what we do, and back to you, Sophie, for our interesting conversation today.
Thank you, Mariana. So why sandboxes for AI in particular? This is what we want to talk about now in this first session. And I'd like to welcome Meni, who is the Digital Policy Manager at the International Chamber of Commerce, to share her thoughts on this. So Meni, you're working at ICC with businesses from all around the world across all sectors. What do you think are the types of AI governance approaches that are needed, and how could sandboxes play a role in the context of AI?
Thank you. Sorry, just taking these off. Thank you so much, Sophie, and many thanks for the wonderful invitation to participate at this session today. I am Meni Anastasiadou. I'm the Digital Policy Manager at the International Chamber of Commerce. For the colleagues that might not know us, we are the institutional representative of more than 45 million businesses across 170 countries. So we really have an inclusive membership that goes beyond sectors and geographies. So AI is really an incredible tool. We see it transforming industries all over the world and really providing productivity gains and improving efficiency and lowering costs for various different sectors and, again, shapes and sizes of businesses. So we also see this, as I've mentioned, being especially true for SMEs, which are the backbone of the global economy. And how we govern AI particularly impacts SMEs. So I really like the presentation that showed earlier, how we should consider AI governance approaches that are fitting to multiple different sizes, let's say, of stakeholders, including, of course, businesses. And this really speaks to the fact that we should be mindful of the approaches that we take on when we're talking about AI governance to ensure that we are inclusive and supportive to innovation. So to that point particularly, ICC has put forward a proposal for an AI governance framework that we call the 4-pillar approach. We publicized it through the ICC narrative on artificial intelligence in September of last year. And the thought process that we present around this is that in order to ensure that we sustain the use of AI in a safe way that benefits different sectors, economies around the world, we really need to make sure that AI governance frameworks are harmonized with existing global agreements, so that they don't really create a patchwork of regulations, which, as we know, makes it particularly challenging for SMEs to respond to. And this can help reduce barriers and compliance complexities. We should also make sure that AI governance frameworks are flexible and do not hinder investment. And of course, that they create, at the end of the day, favorable commercial conditions that can support entrepreneurship. So back to my point on ICC's four-pillar narrative or four-pillar approach to AI governance. So what we want to show is that by adhering to the ideas that I mentioned earlier, all businesses can really harness the power of AI to drive innovation and ensure compliance and build trust. So if we align AI governance with that in mind, we can really ensure that everyone is equipped to harness AI and accelerate their growth. Now, regulatory sandboxes are really a great tool that actually respond to this framework of governance, and they can really enable the safe and real-world testing of AI systems, and particularly, for SMEs. Mariana, you spoke earlier about how sandboxes were first used in fintech, but since then we have seen how their use has spread to cover other areas and covering an inclusive set of geographies. So I really like the mapping that you've shown us earlier, which really speaks to what important of a tool AI sandboxes are to the trustworthy and safe AI governance model. So just to give you even an example, and speaking to the use of sandboxes and how those are effective for SMEs, just as we know how engineers, when they are in aerospace, they're always testing on the ground how an airplane works and to make sure that it's safe before it actually flies. And it's the same idea, the same principle, making sure that we bring together all stakeholders to have the time to test if AI works, what are the right safeguards to apply, what are the right principles and guidelines to make sure are in place, that we make the complete use of all the benefits that AI has to offer. And this can eventually then help all deployers, developers, and users of AI to really take off, and can help eventually also SMEs take off in their use, just as airplanes do. So perhaps maybe I can stop here and.
Thank you for that analogy. I think it's really helpful. I'd now like to move on to Alex Mozo, who's the policy officer at the European AI Office. Alex, your role at the AI Office has a component which is very much focused on sandboxes. Could you share a bit of background on the role of sandboxes in the EU AI Act and why you are thinking of how we can actually use these tools?
Yes, of course, I would be happy to, Sophie, and also thank you so much for those considerations, Manny. It's really important, as you say, that we create favorable commercial conditions, and I think it's this balancing act, right, of responsibility, but also like innovation and how we get that right, because as citizens we want great products, but also kind of safe products and services, right? So I'm just going to spend 3 minutes to talk about 3 things. The first is a bit of my story, and the second is this balancing act, and the third kind of what are we doing in the European Commission and this implementing act that we are working on. So I have a background as a social data scientist and also with artificial intelligence in public services. So I worked 5 years with AI policy nationally in Norway with the research community, with machine learning, artificial intelligence and robotics. However, I was also kind of involved a lot of the time in this sandbox we had in Norway for privacy, but that had exclusively kind of AI cases, and a lot of exit reports that you can find on the internet. If you search for the privacy sandbox in Norway. So being here in Norway and being back, I now work in Brussels, and I've been there for 1 year with my family, working in the European AI office, and it's been quite a journey to start in a new place. And but I have to say it's a really wonderful place to be if you're interested in AI policy and law, and it kind of it's brought me to think about the whole European region, right? And how do we kind of get this balancing act right? Because I think as a region, we have an approach, we have certain values that we aspire to. And for us, I think we want to be treated in the best way possible as citizens, as co-workers, as part of society. So I think it's the case that if we want to have responsible innovation, we need an evidence basis to inform that policy, right? So if we don't learn, this regulatory learning, kind of like there are regulators that are building their competence on AI as we speak, and try to see kind of what is the right way, to ensure that we get this innovation that we want, but also in a way that fulfills citizens' needs, and it's not just based on a buzzword or like based on a promise that is unfulfilled, right? So to not waste money and time, we have to make sure that products actually work as intended. And the sandboxes are, I think, a really good mechanism, a good policy mechanism to do this. So what are we doing in the European Commission right now? We are really working together with member states. We have an AI regulatory sandbox subgroup under the AI board. So we work with member states on a very regular basis. We are writing an implementing act for AI regulatory sandboxes. And we are supporting the rollout of the sandboxes across Europe with the coordination and support action EU's AIR. So yeah, so I think in that sense, it's there's a wide range of things that we are doing, but right now it's just sort of like what frameworks are we looking at? And I have to say in the autumn as well, we will be kind of like putting out this, because that's part of the democratic process for you to comment as well. So I just encourage everyone who's listening to sort of like keep track of when we are releasing this draft implementing act, so that you also can like tell us about your opinion, because we are not the arbitrators of knowledge, in this, in a sense that we kind of just want to understand how to do this in the best way possible, right? So it's not necessarily true that Europe has all the best solutions, I think we have to look globally at like how we can do this together. So, which is also why I'm here today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Alex. And as Mariana shared on her map, which maps different AI and data sandboxes around the world, sandboxes for digital policy challenges and new technologies aren't just being looked at in Europe. It's also a pretty global tool that's being explored in Asia, notably Singapore, also in Latin America, Brazil, Chile, and also in Africa as well. The Datasphere Initiative has a whole component on Africa and sandboxes, the Africa Sandboxes Forum. And as part of this work, we hosted a co-creation lab in Abuja, Nigeria, as part of the African Data Protection Conference that took place in May. And Nigeria itself is looking at developing a sandbox in the context of their data protection law as a way to help companies comply with this new data protection law. And I'd like to bring in Jimson, who is the chairman of AFICTA, which is one of the biggest private sector organizations in Africa, and bringing together companies from all across the continent. Jimson, you were there in Abuja and have been working on regulatory innovation and technology for many, many years. Why do you think a sandbox is an interesting way to develop policy and innovation? And could you share a bit about how Nigeria is also thinking about this?
Thank you very much, Sophie. And good morning, everybody. My name again is Jimson Olufuye. I'm the chair of the Advisory Council of the Africa ICT Alliance, AFICTA. AFICTA was founded in 2012 with 6 countries in Africa. And today, we covered about 43 countries in Africa. Our members are ICT associations, companies, and individual professionals across Africa. Well, that is my volunteer work. And for my day work, I run Contemporary Consulting. I'm the principal consultant there. And we're into data center management, cybersecurity, integration, software, and research. So it's really a great pleasure to serve in that capacity of a FICTA chair, founder at that time, and even right now still very much involved in it. And I'm very, very happy to be associated with Leaders Fair and with the topic indeed. Yes, Sophie, we had a great event in Abuja last month. It was really spectacular. We had Maureen, Rispa, and of course you also there virtually. So it was a great capacity development event, and I want to congratulate you for that. And I can see Bertrand right there in the public. I appreciate all your work, really. You've been on it for quite a while, veteran indeed. So thank you for what you do. The concept of sandboxes is very, very important, very, very relevant, and very, very appropriate, especially in the AI sphere, because we all know that AI is the main thing, the in thing, and many people are concerned about kind of ramifications of AI, maybe for harm. But we believe there's a lot of good in it if it is properly regulated going forward. We do know that the whole essence of even our gathering here, IGF, as part of WISIS, is so that we can have people-centered, inclusive information society. And the information society is still evolving. And AI is going to play a very, very important role. And that's why that workshop, I was happy that I was part of it. We had the regulators there. We had the Nigerian Data Protection Commission was there fully. And also the NCC, Nigeria Communication Commission, and also companies, AI companies, civil society people, academics, and quite a number. And it was really very rich. We look at the three aspects, indeed, operational, regulatory, and hybrid. And we had case studies. That was quite interesting. And so the meeting aligned with even the expectation of the participants and the broad stakeholders in AFICTA. Simply because Nigeria has just evolved its AI strategy. AI strategy was evolved, bringing all stakeholders to work on it. Now we're going to AI law, okay, and we need a regulation. And also, it must start with data governance, basically. And that's why the Nigerian Data Protection Commission took it very seriously. And they have considered that, indeed, they're going to adopt it because it will help with a proper regulation. Even some of us that develop application, we also will learn a lot that we can actually use it to be beneficial in terms of market reach, in terms of the kind of product we need to design, in terms of what customer wants. And even there, we, of course, knew that the Central Bank of Nigeria, they've actually adopted some form of, say, sandboxes, even to regulate the financial sector. So it's a rich concept, and I think we need to enrich it more. We need to keep the conversation going. Because right now, just less than 10 African countries that have AI strategy. Less than 10. So, and from AI strategy, we need to move over to AI regulation. And regulation is very key to direct products, because we don't want products that are for harm. We want products that are for good, that will be beneficial to the people, and also bridge the digital divide, which is a main idea with WISIS, and also with GDC, and of course for sustainable development goal. So this lines up with WISIS, GDC, and the expectation for the achievement of sustainable development goal. So AFICTA fully aligns with it, and we'll continue to support the advocacy and the engagement so that regulators can do the right thing, and also our members too can know what is expected of them concerning their products. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jimson. Thanks for also putting what we're talking about here today in the context of the wider world of internet governance too, and within the WISIS process. So Now I'd like to actually just go back to the Menti again. If we can have a look at the second Menti question we have for all of our participants. This question is, we'd like you to have a think about the types of sectors and areas where AI is being applied, or also the data governance point that Jimson mentioned is in there as an option. But what issue do you think would benefit most from AI Sandbox? So what kind of sector do you think could be most helpful? So while those results come in, what I'd like to do now is move on to the next part of the discussion, which is looking at when and how do you actually do one of these sandboxes. We've heard in this first part a lot of excitement and interest of, the potential for these tools. But if you're a government and you're actually starting to think, okay, how do I have the resources to design and set up a sandbox? Or if you're a company thinking, what are the incentives that I have to actually participate in a regulatory sandbox or set up one myself that could perhaps be an operational sandbox? Where do you start? And I'd like to bring in Natalie Cohen, who's the head of regulatory policy at the OECD, to start us off. Natalie, what would you say, based on your research and work you've been doing with a diverse group of governments, what is the role of sandboxes within the regulatory process, and what sort of challenges might governments face?
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Just to clarify, I'm head of regulatory policy for global challenges specifically. And one of the things that I'm looking at is this answer of how do you regulate for new technologies and how do you regulate in a way that is innovation friendly. And the OECD's answer to that, I would say, is our 2021 recommendation on agile regulatory governance to harness innovation. And as part of that recommendation, we have a big focus on regulatory experimentation. And sandboxes are just one aspect of regulatory experimentation. So I think a first consideration for a government is to look at the specific policy objectives they want to achieve, and then what is the best way for them to achieve that. Because regulatory experimentation can also mean just policy prototyping, it can mean innovation test beds, or it can just mean using piloting powers to test different processes. So we think regulatory experimentation is really important. It helps policymakers, regulators, and industry come together in a collaborative way, as Mentimeter pulled out, to shape and improve regulatory environments in a way that manages the tensions that can be created between regulation and innovation. And we think sandboxes are particularly well suited to regulatory experimentation, where companies are more towards the stage of early commercialization or on the point of bringing something to market, and they want to influence the regulatory framework around that and remove barriers to actually accessing the market. Whereas some other forms of experimentation, like innovation test beds, might be more around proof of concept. And as has been mentioned, sandboxes are not new. They have been around for a while, and they have been used with success, specifically in the fintech sector. But at the OECD, we kind of have two aspects to our work. We provide tools and guidance to help governments develop and build sandboxes. And we also provide technical assistance and support to countries to set up a sandbox, but sometimes also to fix a broken sandbox. So one thing I would like to say is they're not always the perfect answer. They can be quite resource intensive to manage. They do require governance resources, and they do have certain elements that need to be in place to ensure success. So, for example, governments need to think about the eligibility criteria for what kinds of businesses and innovations they want to test, and make sure that that is transparent. They need to be clear about the testing framework and the evaluation process that will be in place to make sure they actually have good evidence that can then go on to influence regulatory policy. And they also need to have a kind of exit ramp. So at the end of the sandbox, when do you close it down, and what is the route for companies to then actually bring products and services to market on the back of that? So all of these things can require a lot of overheads, both for the regulators who need to be funded and resourced and have the capability to manage that process, and also for the participating businesses. So sometimes one thing governance need to think about is also providing the funding support to businesses, particularly if they want SMEs to come and participate. Some successful sandboxes have been successful in terms of testing products and services and bringing them to market, but they've been primarily successful with larger corporates. And so sometimes what SMEs need support with is part of accessing, it could be accessing data, it could be legal and compliance resources as well. So that's another thing to think about if you want to create a diverse and sustainable approach to sandboxes. So I've mentioned a couple of the kind of the key issues around things that countries need to think about there. There are various tensions to manage within sandboxes around the impact on competition and innovation. So regulators and policymakers will be keen not to create market distortions, not to kind of overly favor the participants that play in sandboxes, while at the same time there need to be incentives for businesses to participate. They need to have some kind of benefit, whether that's accelerating their route to market or providing them with enhanced support around some of those resourcing and funding considerations that I have mentioned. So the OECD is in the process of publishing a toolkit on how to develop and design sandboxes that will come out in the coming weeks. And as I mentioned, we provide technical support to both members and non-member countries. So we've done work on Croatia that has led to the development of this toolkit, and we're about to start a project with Portugal on one of their sandboxes too. So I think another thing is countries might also need advice and support on how to deploy these things, and that's where they can reach out.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Very helpful, and lots of points you made that I really wanted us to come back on. Before we do, can we just get the results of the Menti to see the different sectors people thought could be particularly useful for AI sandboxes? Okay, yeah, I guess finance is maybe not surprising since thinking of how sandboxes kind of originated as a concept, but we can see health as well being a big one, which is good because we're going to have some discussion on health a bit later in this session. Now I'd like to bring into this conversation Tiago Guimarães Moraes, who is a researcher at VUB in Belgium. Tiago, you're researching sandboxes around the world, and you also have some experience yourself participating and designing one. From what Natalie was saying in terms of some of the challenges that governments can face in actually setting up a sandbox or really deciding whether or not this is the right type of regulatory experimentation tool, what could you say in terms of how governments can best manage resources to set up a sandbox, include transparency, maybe also bring in different types of stakeholders like civil society? Could you share some of your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and thanks, Sophie, for the invitation, the Datasphere invitation. It has been very nice to be engaging with the Datasphere and other colleagues that I see here in several fora, and definitely being the IGF, it's definitely relevant for such a topic. Just before starting, as a very clear disclaimer, I'm speaking today as a researcher, a PhD researcher at VUB, as you mentioned, but some of you might know me as well as a practitioner from the Brazilian Data Protection Authority. Today, I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but of course, as part of my role there, I've been co-working with several colleagues to launch a pilot sandbox, and hopefully there will be news on that soon. So yeah, it will be a nice way to see how a young authority is dealing with this challenge of establishing something that can be very resource intensive, but at the same time, it is manageable if some care is taken. And maybe my comment then will be to complement a bit what Natalie said, but also to show the other side of the cup. It's true that Sandbox is not the only experimentation tool, and I think any regulator that wants to establish one has to think and consider if, how, why, right, when, all the questions that we're discussing here to establish a sandbox. But one thing that we have also learned, and I've seen based on the experience that different jurisdictions have been doing, is that it's quite common when you're still testing the waters, you sandbox the sandbox. So basically you create a pilot, and these pilots several times you deal with the resource that you have to decide the scope and how broad your sandbox will be. This means, for example, if you rely more on your internal staff and the expertise they already have, or if you will have some kind of partnership or some specific experts, consultants like contracting. So all of this will depend of your conditions, of course, but there are several institutions that are actually supporting such initiatives. So, for example, at international level, we have like development banks, like in Latin America, we have CAF. There's also CEPAL, and other institutions around the globe are also trying to somehow engage and support. So this is a way of dealing with a bit of this challenge of limited resources. So in the end, the word cooperation is really important here. So it makes a lot of sense to be in the IGF discussing about that. And maybe as this first part of my speech, one other thing that I believe it's very important to consider as you frame who will be your co-partners in this endeavor, and how you're going to establish for how long, because some sandboxes can be quite short. There are even cases of like 3-month sandboxes. There are others that go very long, like 5 years. But in general, and there's a lot of global reports on that and academic research on that shows that in average we are aiming for like 6 months to 1-2 years. It really depends of the goal of what you're testing, right? And you can actually have also flexibility of how many projects, how many use cases you'll be dealing at the same time. So all of this is part of the design of the sandbox, very important to consider. So my last comment for now would be to touch also what Sophie just mentioned, that many times when we're talking about several stakeholders that are being engaged, either as participants or partners, we actually forgot many times the role that civil society has here, especially when we are now moving to this arena of sandboxing in AI and sandboxing in AI in several circumstances. We're talking about individuals that are having their personal data processed or that will be affected by these AI solutions, regardless if the personal data has been processed or not. And because of that, I think it's very important to also hear the voice of these individuals. And maybe this is something that we need to improve in our framework. So what will be the role through all the sandbox experience? Because the civil society and individuals, they might have an important role before, during, and after the sandbox is done. And this is exactly what I'm researching right now. So for now, I only bring this as a provocation, but I hope in the future, when as we continue engaging in this forums, I may be able to also share some insights of what I found the potential role of civil society here. But would be glad to know other colleagues' comments on that.
Thank you so much for that, Tiago. Yeah, you covered a lot, which I think we're going to have time to come back to. I'd like to also bring in now Maureen Amotorine, who is our Africa Sandboxes Forum lead at the Data Initiative. Maureen has been doing a lot of work researching in Africa how sandboxes are being used, interviewing private sector who have been participating in sandboxes, also government setting them up. And Maureen, could you maybe give us a bit of a, picking on also what Natalie was saying in terms of some of the barriers and thinking that governments are needing to do on how to actually go about setting up a sandbox, and also thinking of the companies themselves joining. What could you say from Africa has been some of your lessons as you've been researching this? And could you also mention a bit about the types of training and support that the Datasphere Initiative is also providing to governments who are planning to set up sandboxes?
Sure, happy to, Sophie. Thank you so much. And I'm really glad to be here to see you all who are participating. So let me start by just sharing a few numbers. So we've looked into sandboxes in Africa, and overall, at least from the last time that we updated the mapping, which was sometime earlier this year, we have about 25 national sandboxes. And of these, 24 are in the finance sector. So, which would mean that authorities and public, or what we call government authorities, are now starting to get into sandboxing. So it's a new space, a space which they have to identify quite a number of the core elements of sandboxes. The beauty is, from the conversations that are happening on the continent, regulators have really embraced the idea of experimentation when it comes to regulating these emerging technologies like AI. And so they're really embracing the idea of sandboxes. But from what we are learning is there are still questions really when it comes again to the core elements of the how, who, when, and all the details that go into sandboxing are some of the things that they are grappling with, because when you realize that it is a new space that they are getting into, because sandboxes have largely been used in the fintech sector. And so part of what we have been doing is, of course, learning from what is available online. Who is sandboxing? Do they have lessons to share with those who are getting into the space of sandboxing? And that we have documented in the report that Mariana shared earlier, the Outlook, Africa Sandboxes Outlook report. But we are also going ahead to engage with stakeholders, and largely, so far it's been largely regulators, but we are also starting to engage with private sector and other types of stakeholders to now start thinking about the core elements of sandboxing. Things like the scope of a sandbox, who are the people you're going to work with, the actors and the stakeholders, then the legal models under which authorities can sandbox, because that is also not yet clear, but also now looking into the resources, which is a huge part of sandboxing, because you will not, we have learned that a number of regulators are indeed grappling with the idea of how does a sandbox get funded? Where does the funding of a sandbox come from? So those are the areas in which we are trying to engage with people, and the idea of raising funds for sandboxing has really had different approaches in different places. Now, part also of what we're doing as we're doing the activities of the Africa Sandboxes Forum is we are learning a lot from sandboxes that are being operated outside of Africa to see what has worked. And so you will notice that some sandboxes that are run by public institutions or authorities either have their funding coming from the core operations of an authority, say it's a data protection authority. So there is that. But part of what we are exploring in Africa, because that's not yet the case that there is core funding for experimentation in some of these authorities, is under, say, the co-creation activities that we are doing with different stakeholders, is to get people to put themselves in the shoes of someone setting up a sandbox and think about, okay, who would this sandbox affect when it comes to other regulators or other sectors? If it's a data protection authority setting up a sandbox, then they are thinking about what other sectors are they going to, is this sandbox going to affect, and can we bring these regulators in and sort of think about some cost sharing models that are, of course, where there is a shared benefit, but also shared kind of costs for the different sectors that are involved in such a sandbox. And then the other thing that we're also trying to make sure that we sort of brainstorm around with stakeholders is the legal models under which they can sandbox, because sometimes it's not clear, and we learned that it's actually one thing that regulators grapple with. Sometimes it's not clear that they actually an authority is allowed to sandbox in any way. So where do they look to find that legal backing to sort of carry out such an experimentation? And if it's not there, then how can they go about that? So these are questions that most regulators and that stakeholders had not yet started thinking about. Well, they know they want to sandbox, thinking about how to sort of see how do they actually approach it has been a challenge, and that we have seen in a number of people that we've been co-creating with. And drawing from, say, the Kigali co-creation lab that we did, we learned from stakeholders that they really would love to use sandboxes to sort of understand if indeed some of the hype around AI, for example, is true for Africa, understand the real value of what some of these emerging technologies are bringing, so that they're able to take them to the next level. And so part of that is really what's been taking our time in Africa to sort of engage stakeholders and understand where they are at and how ready they are to implement sandboxes. And as I conclude, I just wanted to mention that part of what we're doing are, of course, group co-creation activities, but we are also offering services such as one-on-one coaching journeys for someone who is ready to sandbox and they want to navigate the journey of all the core elements of sandboxing that are not necessarily direct. That is also what we're doing. We are conducting master classes with groups of stakeholders that are ready to learn how to technically run a sandbox. That is also part of the activities that we are looking into, because the need for sandboxes is already there and has already been recognized by regulators. So now what's really missing is that push to the next level. So working with them into creating these sandboxes and navigating these challenges around resources, which we know are key almost everywhere.
Thank you, Maureen.
For now,
thank you, Maureen. Thanks for also sketching out the different activities and sandbox support that we can also provide at the Datasphere. So I'd also like to first of all, just to mention, if people in the room want to make a comment or a question, there's two microphones either side of the room. If you want to go over there, please feel free. While people have a think about that, I'd also like us to bring up the next Menti question we have as well, which picks up on some of this discussion about, we want to collect the kind of challenges and barriers that people may have when they're thinking of whether and how to sandbox. So please take a look at the Menti. It'll be on the screen soon. But now I'd also like to bring in a perspective from the health sector, and I think this is timely because many of you highlighted this as a key sector where testing AI technologies and policy through sandboxes could be useful. So Jai, I can see you're online. Jai's connecting here from the Asia eHealth Information Network. Could you talk to us a bit about where you think the potential for sandboxes are in the health sector? And could you particularly touch on how they could be useful in a cross-border context as well? Because I know that you're doing a lot of this in terms of your convergence work at the Asia eHealth Information Network. So over to you, Jai, please. And Jai is the Executive Director at the Asia eHealth Information Network. Jai, can you hear us?
Yes, Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I would like to actually quickly introduce about our network, which is Asia eHealth Information Network, which is a regional digital health network with core focus on the Southeast Asia and Western Pacific in terms of the World Health Organization regions. But we do have members across 84 countries over 2,600 members from 84 countries. And our primary focus is capacity building, and then also support for the national digital health programs. That way, we actually work with the governments in the countries and supporting them in terms of the core health information building blocks, and then supporting them in terms of the gaps that are existing currently in terms of the governance, architecture, people and program management, standards, and interoperability. So I think many of the speakers ahead of me have mentioned about various challenges. So one of the core challenges is like who should be involved in the sandboxes, and then who is actually qualified to take the decisions. Of course, the regulators mostly, and then also from the government point of view, they uh, usually are the ones who actually start or decide on the sandboxing criteria. But then, we have also had recent discussions how, like I think Tiago also mentioned about it, how civil society could actually participate meaningfully. But then, like coming back to your primary question, like we have seen, because like we work extensively with countries now, like we have official representations from 15 countries, and 2 more are likely to join in what is known as the Working Council. Working Council is nothing but representation from countries which advise the AHIN's board of directors, as well as our operations in the region. So we have seen sandboxes in health sector, especially on AI, telehealth, and then also for data governance and data sharing. But three things have coming up in the recent times. One is, of course, many countries do have the universal health coverage programs where sandbox environment actually helps them to get uh, the applications developed by private sector also to be getting on the mainstream, as long as they conform to the standards that are set by the regulators. In most of the countries, as we are aware, the digital developments have been very, very, very fast paced, whereas the regulations, especially from the health sector, has been decades old. They are still, there's this pacing issue of catching up with the developments in the regulatory space. So in these emerging technologies does need the support in terms of the sandboxes. But in many countries, this is also my experience that they don't necessarily say a regulatory sandbox. Sometimes they call it test bed, sometimes it's a living lab, testing environment, and then also a regulatory sandbox. So many of them use multiple terms depending on the priorities and the local needs. So the three most sought after needs are like to get uh, applications, different applications, health applications developed even by private sector into the national mainstream, conforming to the regulations where the regulations are currently still not there, and then also to shape the regulations and policy space. And then the second one is on interoperability, because most of the solutions need to be actually interoperable. There are standards, but still there are sandboxes that are set up to make sure that the solutions actually conform to the standards. So interoperability is the second use case. And the third one is about the data. We have occasions where there are countries from which, like for example, medical tourism, as well as people going for treatments in other countries. So there is a need for information to be shared at the same time in a very responsible way. So these are the broad areas in which we see sandboxes in our region. And then, in fact, like we do have a country currently discussing with us their need for sandboxes and then probably support. And they have expressed several challenges also. So in fact, we look forward to work together with DataSphere and other partners, especially those who are willing to support us in terms of the funding and capacity building in this space to work together. I hope I answered your question. If not, please let me know. Thank you, Sophie and colleagues.
Thank you so much, Jai. I think that really provides a good kind of snapshot of the different types of considerations people and experts in the health sector, especially in the Asia region, are thinking when it comes to how we can make the most of these different types of technologies for interoperable and cross-border health approaches. And we've got also now some of the different points that we've heard from the Menti in terms of the different barriers. I'd also like to just note a question, a very useful question that we've had on the chat from a representative from the Institute for Policy Studies and Media Development in Vietnam. This is a think tank specializing in digital technology policy. Their question is around how do countries design policy packages and govern sandboxes? Should AI and data sandboxes be structured separately or integrated? And what types of legislative or regulatory features have proven most effective in making participation more accessible to businesses and especially SMEs? So as we go now into our final set of interventions from speakers, I can't see that anyone in the room wants to make a comment, so I'll keep going. I'd like to, invite Alex again to share some of his reactions to what he's been hearing throughout the discussion today, the types of barriers that people have looked at when it comes to designing sandboxes, and also linking to the cross-border potential of sandboxes that Jai was talking about. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're also thinking of this in the context of the EU AI Act as well? That could be helpful. Over to you.
Yes, of course. It's really great to listen to all these different perspectives, and I think I could start with the last questions. I mean, especially relating to kind of like how to facilitate SMEs and startups. And in the EU AI Act, it is fairly explicit as well that the participation for SMEs and startups should be free. You know, so I think this is kind of like I guess one mechanism, of course. If it's if already a startup and SME or SME have kind of overheads, then it could, of course, be challenging to participate. And I think Thiago's questions about civil society. I think one of the really wonderful things about sandboxes is that, and this is also a conception in the AI Act, that we have these sort of exit reports. So I think like dissemination activities and involving a broad set of stakeholders in kind of thinking about what did we learn, you know? Because this is, I think OECD outlined as well that this can have a cost, you know? So to get value out of the money that is being spent on these sandboxes, I think one should not ignore the importance of dissemination activities. So I mean, in many ways, sandboxes were, created as a measure to try to ensure responsible innovation. And I think just talking about what is the irresponsible innovation or potential for irresponsible innovation, right? So, and in the finance sector, you know, with 2008 and the financial crisis, you know, collateralized debt obligations and yeah, sorry. Yeah. So. There's something wrong with the sound.
Yeah, there's
I
an
think.
echo.
Yeah. So, I'm sure they'll fix it too. Okay, things are better.
Yeah, there's still an echo.
There's an echo. Okay. Let's see. This is now hopefully better.
Yeah, that sounds
good. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so I think with the financial crisis and collateralized debt obligations and kind of like what are kind of irresponsible innovations in a way as well, and what way can you explore this in a sandbox? So I think in a lot of ways, what we are coming to realize is that AI affects us all, you know, across regions. So in a sense, you know, what can we do to really unite across borders, you know, and like this is also why kind of like these sort of joint AI regulatory sandboxes as a policy mechanisms, I think were conceived of in a sense, you know, to see kind of like can there be really kind of extensive collaborations on like transport or health or like other aspects, and could sort of like leading regulatory environments kind of come together to really try to dive into that and figure that out. So this is kind of like part of what we are going to explore, and this is also written into the AI Act itself, but also into the Interoperable Europe Act. There is kind of a mention of cross-border sandboxes. So I think we will see over the coming years this new type of experimentation, you know, and I think like what I can say right now is that we are kind of starting to facilitate that, and we will be working on the rollout of that. So kind of like any type of engagement with this always, I think, will be welcome over the coming years. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. And I can see we have one question from the floor, which is great. Before we go to you, I just want to get Jimson to share some reactions to what Alex has been saying and what we've discussed so far, especially about business incentives when it comes to participating in sandboxes. Jimson, knowing the members of Aficta, what do you think what kind of questions would they have, and how could you incentivize business to participate in sandboxes? Would it be, as Natalie's saying, there would need to be, perhaps funding for some SMEs? Would there be some incentive if the sandbox was actually going to be kind of cross-border in nature, so actually looking at interoperability between different African countries? Where do you see some of these questions that people have been asking?
Yes, thank you very much, Sophie. The discussion has been very fluid and very useful and highly relevant. To really operationalize sandboxes, it requires a lot of stakeholders, a lot of interest, and importantly to the SMEs, it needs some coordination, and that's why Aficta is there, and we are engaged in terms of creating the necessary awareness, especially in terms of members that want to create products that has country-wide and regional-wide benefits. So in this regard, of course, sandboxes would be necessary, absolutely necessary. We know that we need to fast-track development, and that is why we need all the partners in terms of funding, in terms of engagement, and in terms of appropriate regulatory directive or direction framework, like Alex mentioned, the AI Act, and the process of bringing that together, which is quite well established in EU now. We will really want similar thing happening across Africa with AU, say UNECA, in terms of their projects, like maybe identity project across Africa, in terms of data structuring, so that SME can be involved ab initio for meaningful participation, and then we can then produce products that are highly relevant and useful, for the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimson. Could we please go to the question in the room? Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Giovanna. I'm at IGF as part of the Brazil Youth Program. I'm one of the facilitators, and it's been an amazing discussion. Thank you very much to Datasphere to putting this discussion together. I have a question about the exit reports and about the documents that might be needed to be drafted during the sandbox implementation. And then asking if you have some advice for governments or other public institutions that might be setting up a sandbox, because I believe that drafting these reports will be a lot of work. And I have some concerns as to, like the operationalization of them specifically. Who will do it? What are the roles of the private companies, if any, in drafting those? What are the goals in actually having them not only as part of like creating a history and, documenting the activity, but also to propose interpretation and paths forward. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you so much. I'm going to take another comment from the floor, and then we'll address those. Bertrand?
Thank you, Sophie. I'm Bertrand Lachapelle, and it's less a comment from the floor, actually, because for full disclosure, I'm attached with the Datasphere initiative. I'm the Chief Vision Officer. I just wanted to highlight and make an additional comment. There are keywords that we don't dare to use, but that are very important in this discussion. One is mistrust. And we have to recognize that in the last 20 years, a huge amount of mistrust has grown between public authorities, private actors, and civil society. Sandboxes are one of the tools that brings the capacity of dialogue, particularly when the discussions are taking place very early on. And in the mapping that the data sphere has done, we see certain countries that are using sandboxes not only for compliance verification or for pure regulatory aspects, but also to understand better between the different actors what are the parameters of a particular sector. The second word is anxiety. There is a little bit of anxiety about this new tool. The methodology is not completely stabilized, and there is a risk. This is not the way operators are functioning. And there are questions of who is taking the lead in one organization. How is the distribution of responsibilities? And I think the work that the European Commission and the AI Office in particular is doing in trying to shape how those things are going to be handled, the work that we're doing at the data sphere through something that we launched, which is a global sandboxes forum, which is a space for exchanging practices around us, is helping in that regard. And I have here something that I'd be happy to distribute regarding the observatory that we have launched that documents all the experiences around the world on sandboxes that we've documented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. Jai, I see you have your hand up. We have 7 minutes left. So yeah, if you want to perhaps answer some of the questions that Giovanna put forward, that would be great, or build on anything. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. I just wanted to quickly add what was shared just now by the speaker from DataSphere. I think most of the times we look at sandboxes as something like, okay, regulators are the ones who own it, and then there is a kind of an entry or like a gatekeeping. But then why not look at the sandboxes in terms of being a co-creative or collaborative space where we actually help the entrepreneurs, because innovation is really required. And then means there are funding constraints or resource constraints. I think that's universal, irrespective. So why not we use this space as an environment where there is a bit of a hand-holding and support that comes from be it regulators or the governments or the academy, like how we can help those innovations that are coming in the space to actually meet the requirements or that meet the expectations in terms of trust, rather than just being gatekeeping. That's my thought.
Thank you, Jai.
And then Ahin also uses this approach known as convergence methodology, where we bring the various stakeholders within the country as well as those who are in the country, probably with external.
Thank you, Jai. Sorry, I just want to pause it because we've got 6 minutes left, and I just would love Tiago to come in to perhaps answer Giovanna's point on the different types of exit reports. I think that's something that I just want to make sure we answer that question, and I think Tiago would have some ideas on that. Tiago, do you want to maybe share your perspective on that, and as an ending comment from you as well?
Yeah.
In 1 minute,
thanks.
if possible.
Yes, of course. I know time is 9, so going straight to the point. Actually, I'm finding fascinating how different regulators have been dealing differently with the exit reports. So in some cases, exit reports have been drafted by the companies, and then many times it becomes more internal knowledge for the regulator. But in other contexts, the regulator has decided to take the lead on that. Like I can give as example the experience in the Norwegian EPA, also the ICO. Several times they have been the one drafting the main exit report, and then of course they do some assessment with the participants to be sure that there's nothing there that's being shared that should not be disclosed. But actually, the way these exit reports, these public ones, have been published, they really cover more about the experience itself than about sensitive, confidential issues, which what the idea should be. And we also see that in the AI Office proposal, or in the AI Act proposal. So, yeah, I think it really depends of how you're going to deal with the exit report. But there's definitely room for flexibility here as well, how it's
Thank
going
you.
to be published.
Thank you, Tiago. And Natalie, I wanted to bring you in as a final kind of wrap-up thought for us, since we're quite short on time. Bertrand mentioned trust, and I think that's something at the IGF this year. There's a lot of, trying to do a lot of trust building and, kind of support international collaboration as much as we can. How do you think Sandboxes can help build this trust at a cross-border level?
Yeah, I think this issue of trust is key. One thing the OECD does is a driver of trust in government survey. And I think on the proportion of countries that reply to say that they have trust that governments will appropriately regulate for new technologies was only about 41%. So that shows that the trust is definitely low. I think regulatory experimentation builds the evidence base for making regulatory reform in an area where the risks are not fully understood. Regulatory attempts on AI are still early stage. And so a lot is being mentioned about the risks to society, to the environment of AI, as well as the obvious economic and innovation benefits. And so I think it's that collaboration element. It's creating a space where regulators and businesses and civil society and a range of stakeholders can dialogue and actually build the evidence base together in a way that can then inform and influence a regulatory regime.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time. I know a 9 a.m. session is sometimes not the easiest one to get to at the IGF, especially after an IGF music night. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you as well for all the people who joined us online. Your time and expertise and questions shared was really valuable to us as we try to understand more about how people are thinking about regulatory experimentation, particularly sandboxes. And yeah, thank you for joining us and hope to see you all soon.